Welcome back to the deep dive. Today, we're really getting into something pretty complex, but I think incredibly important. We're tackling projective identification, or PI.
Yes, a really foundational concept in psychoanalytic thought, and a controversial one, too, in some ways.
Absolutely. And we're looking at it particularly through the lens of thinkers like Thomas Ogden. He talks about it as this kind of intersubjective thirdness.
Exactly. It takes Klein's original idea and expands it significantly.
Yeah.
We're not just talking about what's inside one person's head anymore.
Right. So our mission today is to sort of unpack that. How does this whole process involve what sounds like a contradiction? This idea of mutual subjugation, but also mutual recognition.
And what does that really mean for how we actually relate to each other, how we, form our sense of self?
It sounds fundamental.
It really is. And it's still evolving. There's that great quote from Donald Meltzer back in '78.
Oh, yeah.
He said something like, "We are still in the process of discovering what projective identification means," basically admitting we're still figuring it all out, even decades after Klein.
Which tells you how deep this runs. So PI isn't just one single thing, is it? It's grown into something much broader.
Oh, absolutely. When analysts talk about PI now, they could be referring to a huge spectrum of things.
Like what?
Well, at one end, you have possibly the very earliest ways mothers and infants communicate, that primal back and forth.
Okay.
Then you have things like fantasies of really kind of coercively getting inside someone else's head, almost like a psychic invasion in fantasy.
Right. That sounds more like the classic idea, maybe.
It can be,
Right.
but it also covers things like the kind of confused states you might see in schizophrenia, very fragmented thinking.
Wow. Okay. Big range.
But here's the kicker. It also includes things that look completely different, like healthy empathy, just genuinely feeling with someone.
So wait, how can it be both psychosis and empathy? What connects those?
That's the key insight, really, from Ogden and others. PI isn't just an event. It's not like, oh, PI happened just then.
Okay.
It's better understood as a quality of experience,
Mm-hmm.
a sort of texture or dimension that's present in all our interactions, all our
A
intersubjectivity.
dimension. So it's always there, but maybe more or less intense.
Exactly. Sometimes it's the main thing defining the interaction. You really feel it strongly. Other times it's just humming along in the background, subtly coloring things.
That makes more sense. It's less like a switch and more like a dial. Okay, so let's get into the mechanics. How does this actually work? What's the fantasy at the heart of it?
Right. So it starts with an unconscious narrative, a story we tell ourselves, often without words, just felt.
Okay.
And the story is about evacuating a part of oneself, getting it out of you
And putting it where?
and into another person, depositing it there, essentially.
Why? What's the point of doing that? Just to get rid of, like, bad feelings. Dump your trash.
Well, sometimes it feels like that, maybe. But the underlying purpose is usually twofold. First, protection. Getting something out of you because it feels dangerous or painful inside.
Okay, self-preservation.
Right. But second, and this is crucial, it can also be about safeguarding something. Maybe a part of you feels precious but vulnerable.
So you put it somewhere safe in someone else.
Exactly. But, and this is key, that someone else isn't experienced as totally separate. There's still a connection, a feeling that part of you is over there, in them.
Yeah.
You haven't fully let go.
That sounds tricky for the other person, I mean. If I've just dumped my, say, unbearable anxiety into you, what happens? How does that work out?
Well, that's where the retrieval part comes in, ideally. Under good conditions, the hope, unconsciously, is that you'll eventually take that part back.
Ah, well,
But it will have been changed somehow by its time inside the other person, maybe detoxified, made less overwhelming, processed,
transform.
transformed, exactly. But
Right.
that's the ideal. If things go wrong, if the conditions are, pathogenic, then when you take it back, it might feel deadened, lifeless. Or worse, it could come back even more toxic or persecutory than before.
So it can backfire badly.
It definitely can.
And you mentioned earlier, it's important we don't think of this as step one, fantasy, step two, action.
Absolutely critical. The sources, Ogden especially, really hammer this home. The unconscious fantasy, the internal story, and the interpersonal event, the actual behavior, the feeling between people,
Mm-hmm.
they are two aspects of a single psychological event. One doesn't cause the other in a simple linear way. They happen together.
So the moment I unconsciously feel you're holding my anger,
My behavior towards you will shift, subtly or not so subtly, to actually try and make you feel or express that anger. It's happening simultaneously, inside and out.
Okay, that's a big conceptual leap. It's not just in my head, it's instantly co-creating a reality between us.
Precisely. And this is where we get into that really fascinating and maybe disturbing idea of mutual negation.
Mutual negation, meaning both people lose something.
In a way, yes. Or perhaps suspend something. It's like the price of admission for this particular kind of intense relating. Think about the recipient first, the person receiving their projection.
Okay.
Their own distinct sense of self, their I-ness, gets, well, subverted, pushed aside a bit. Unconsciously, they agree to participate in negating their own separateness.
They make room.
They make psychological room, exactly, to be, in fantasy, occupied or taken over by that part, the projector evacuated. It's like they're lending out psychic real estate.
Wow. Okay. But it's mutual negation. So the projector doesn't get off scot-free. They're not just dumping and running.
Not at all.
Yeah.
That's the reciprocal part. The projector also engages in a kind of self-negation. They become, as Ogden puts it, other to himself.
Other to himself.
Because they're now both I, the one doing their projecting, and simultaneously not I. Because that evacuated part is now disowned. It's treated like a foreign object, experienced only through the recipient. They've given up direct ownership of it.
So both people are kind of less themselves temporarily. Both have sacrificed a bit of their individual boundary.
That's a good way to put it. They both blurred their edges.
So what happens in that blurred space? If you have two people negating parts of themselves, what fills the gap?
This is the core of Ogden's idea. What emerges is a third subject. It's not just projector plus recipient. It's something new.
A third subject, like a new entity born out of the interaction.
Exactly. The subject of projective identification.
Yeah.
And this entity is weirdly both the projector and the recipient, but also neither of them. It exists between them. It's a shared, co-created psychic reality.
And you called this the subjugating third earlier. Why subjugating? Does it dominate them?
Yes, in a specific way. It subsumes their individual subjectivities for a time. It kind of flattens the natural back and forth, the dialectic between being separate and being connected.
So while this third is active, they're kind of merged, operating under its rules.
Pretty much. They're both caught up in the dynamics of this shared intersubjective creation. It dictates the emotional weather, you could say.
Okay, but this sounds, potentially really coercive. You use words like occupied, taken over. The sources mention feelings like kidnapping or mesmerization.
Right.
So why on earth would anyone unconsciously agree to this? To having their sense of self temporarily squashed or taken over by this third, it seems counterintuitive to our need for individuality.
It does. And that leads us straight into the central mind-bending paradox of projective identification.
Okay, ready.
The reason individuals unconsciously submit to this subjugation, this merging, is precisely to free themselves.
Free themselves by being subjugated. How does that work?
To free themselves from the limits of who they were before the interaction. It's like you have to temporarily give up your current self or parts of it to allow a new, potentially larger self to emerge.
So it's a kind of psychological death and rebirth process facilitated by the other person.
That's a powerful way to think about it, yes. In PI, both people involved are simultaneously limited, stuck in the roles dictated by the third, but also potentially enriched. They're stifled and vitalized at the same time.
How are they vitalized?
Because this subjugating third, this shared entity, becomes a kind of vehicle. It allows thoughts, feelings, ways of being to be experienced. Things that neither person could access on their own, locked in their individual perspectives.
So together, they create a space where new psychological material can actually come into existence, something bigger than the sum of their parts.
Exactly. It becomes generative. It allows for potentials to be realized that were previously just potential, unthinkable, unfelt.
Wow. So this isn't just about defenses then, it's about creation.
Right.
Growth.
Fundamentally, yes. Ogden suggests this drive to create these intersubjective constructions, these thirds, is incredibly deep. As deep, he says, as basic needs like hunger or thirst.
Why so deep?
Because it's seen as a way out, an escape route from what he calls the unending, futile wanderings in their own internal object world.
Meaning getting stuck inside our own heads, just endlessly recycling the same old patterns.
Pretty much. That feeling of psychic isolation, of solipsism. So in PI, the two participants become these Unwitting, unconscious allies.
Allies against what?
Against being totally alone in their own subjective reality. They kind of unconsciously collude to break out of that isolation, even if the process itself feels coercive or confusing while it's happening.
That paints the recipient's role very differently. They're not just a passive container, a dumping ground.
Not at all. They're an active collaborator. Remember, they're not just identifying with the projected part. They are, in a sense, becoming another. They're experiencing themselves and the projected part through the lens of this new shared third subject.
And that experience, it changes them.
It has to. It disrupts their previous state, their potential stagnation. For both people, really, this temporary merger, this dance of projection and reception, is a way to get unstuck, to evolve. You merge, you experience something new within that merged state, and then, hopefully, you re-emerge, transformed.
Okay, so the coercion, the feeling of being taken over is sort of baked into the process. It's necessary for the transformation.
It seems to be inherent in the intensity of creating that third.
Right, but then how do we know when it's gone wrong? If coercion isn't the sign of pathology, what is? How do we distinguish between a PI that leads to growth and one that's just destructive?
That's a absolutely crucial distinction. And the answer is perhaps surprising. Pathology in PI is not measured by how intense the coercion feels, or how strong the countertransference emotions are.
Really? So feeling totally overwhelmed or controlled isn't necessarily bad PI?
Not in itself, no. Intense feelings might just mean a lot is being processed. The real measure of pathology, according to Ogden,
Yes.
is the inability or unwillingness of the people involved to release one another from that subjugation,
Getting stuck.
getting stuck in the merger. When the third stops being a temporary vehicle for transformation and becomes a permanent prison, the dynamism is lost. It becomes static, dead, stifling.
So growth requires eventually moving beyond the third, reestablishing that sense of separateness, but now changed.
Exactly. You need to supersede the subjugating third. To get back to that healthy tension, that dialectic between being one and being two, being similar and being different.
And how does that happen? How do you get unstuck?
It requires an act of mutual recognition.
Mutual recognition, both people seeing each other again as separate.
Yes, but more than just seeing. Acknowledging, validating the other's separate subjectivity after the merging experience. In therapy, this often happens when the analyst can accurately understand and interpret the intense emotional reality that the third created between them.
The interpretation kind of breaks the spell.
It helps both individuals make sense of the powerful, often confusing feelings generated within that shared state. It allows them to reclaim their own individual experiences, but now those experiences are richer, transformed by what happened in the PI. They reappropriate themselves, but as changed selves.
This idea of recognition being key, it feels like it connects to broader philosophical ideas about how we become who we are through others.
Absolutely. There's a very strong explicit link made to Hegel's ideas, particularly his allegory about self-consciousness.
How does that fit in?
Well, Hegel suggested that when two consciousnesses first meet, they initially see their own potential reflected in the other. There's a sense of losing oneself in the other, finding oneself there.
Okay, like the initial merging in PI.
Exactly. But for Hegel, just seeing yourself reflected isn't enough to become a fully realized, self-aware subject.
Yep.
You remain kind of alienated,
Yeah.
dependent,
Until
until the other person actively gives him back to himself.
gives them back.
Through recognition.
Yeah.
By acknowledging the first person as separate, distinct, yet fundamentally interdependent, it's that act of being recognized, being given back by the other, that truly creates a transformed, more self-aware subject. Without that recognition,
Yeah.
the tension collapses. You just get stuck in what Hegel called a dead unity. The potential for growth is lost. The merger becomes sterile.
Wow. So that act of recognition is everything. It's the release valve, the thing that makes the whole intense coercive process actually worthwhile and growth promoting.
It's the key that unlocks the transformation, yes.
Okay. So let's treat and bring this all together for you listening. Projective identification. It's clearly way more than just a simple defense mechanism.
There's more.
It's this really deep, intense, intersubjective dance. It involves evacuating parts of ourselves into someone else.
Often parts we find difficult or vulnerable.
Right. And then, crucially, both people kind of negate their separateness for a while, creating this shared psychic space, this third,
A temporary co-created reality.
which feels powerful, maybe even coercive, but holds the potential for transformation. And the way out, the way to actually get that transformation
Is through mutual recognition.
Mhm.
Seeing and acknowledging the other person's separateness again, allowing both individuals to reemerge, changed by the shared experience.
We basically merge temporarily to become more fully ourselves.
It's a profound paradox.
Yeah.
We give up individuality
Yeah.
to ultimately enhance it.
So here's a final thought for you to maybe chew on this whole process. We unconsciously give up our separateness, our individuality, in order to push beyond the limits of that very individuality. We let ourselves be subjugated by the shared third so we can free ourselves, from who we used to be. Think about your own closest relationships. Where might this kind of intense, perhaps unspoken, unconscious alliance be operating? And crucially, is that essential escape clause, that act of mutual recognition of being given back to yourself, is it actually present? Or are you perhaps stuck in the merger? Something to definitely reflect on.